The Kaurath Empire had ruled over the galaxy for 3,000 years, and during all that time, they had never met anyone who could challenge them. Their ships were incredible, using strange crystal technology that could actually bend the fabric of space around them. When they fired their weapons, armor just melted away like it was nothing. They had crushed every other civilization they encountered, and they expected humans to be no different. When humanity finally figured out how to travel faster than light and started exploring beyond their own solar system, the Kaurath noticed immediately. To them, humans were just another primitive species that needed to learn their place in the galaxy. The Empire had seen this story play out dozens of times before. A young civilization develops space travel, gets excited about exploring, and then reality hits them when they meet the Kaurath. The ending was always the same. Ambassador General Vorath was the one they sent to Earth. He was an old veteran who had delivered the same speech to countless worlds. His ship was absolutely massive, bigger than anything humans had ever built. When it entered Earth's atmosphere and hung there over Geneva, Switzerland, it blocked out the sun for miles around. That was the point. The Kaurath wanted everyone to see just how outmatched humanity was before the negotiations even started. Inside the United Nations building, President Catherine Morrison tried to keep her composure as Vorath walked in. He was tall, with skin that seemed to shimmer with a faint blue light. He did not shake hands or offer any pleasantries. He simply sat down and started talking. His voice had a strange musical quality that made it hard to interrupt him. He told them that humanity had 72 hours to make a choice. They could surrender everything, every warship, every weapon, every military installation. They would have to accept Kaurath governors who would oversee Earth's governments. They would have to give 20% of everything they made, everything they produced, to the Empire as tribute. If they refused, the Kaurath would simply wipe out humanity and take what they wanted anyway. President Morrison looked at the men sitting beside her. Secretary of Defense Robert Hayes was a former general who had spent his whole life preparing for wars between human nations. Admiral James Cooper commanded Earth's entire space fleet. These were tough, experienced men who had seen combat and knew what war really meant. But even they looked shaken by what they were hearing. Morrison tried to explain that humans did not want trouble. They were happy to stay in their own solar system. They would trade peacefully with anyone willing to trade with them. All they wanted was to be left alone to develop at their own pace. Vorath listened to her words with a slight smile on his face. He had heard all of this before. Every species said the same things when faced with Kaurath power. They all claimed they wanted peace. They all promised they would not cause problems. And then, when they realized they had no choice, they all surrendered. He saw the fear in their eyes and mistook it for acceptance. What he did not understand was that humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years. They knew what fear looked like, and they also knew that fear and surrender were not the same thing. After Vorath left, the Kaurath military began studying Earth's defenses. They were thorough and professional about it, scanning every ship, every satellite, every military base on the planet and in orbit. What they found made them laugh. Humanity had 73 combat ships scattered across the solar system. These vessels used railguns that fired metal slugs, missiles with chemical warheads, and lasers that were barely more powerful than industrial cutting tools. The humans were still using rocket engines for propulsion. By Kaurath standards, this was like showing up to a modern battlefield with swords and shields. The intelligence report that went back to the Kaurath fleet was dismissive and contemptuous. It estimated that the entire human military could be eliminated in less than 6 hours if it came to actual fighting. The analysts saw no reason to recommend caution or special tactics. This would be exactly like every other conquest the Empire had conducted over the past 3 millennia. Simple, quick, and completely one-sided. What nobody in the Kaurath Empire knew was that humans had a secret buried in their past. 4 to 7 years earlier, when humanity first started building colonies on Mars and mining operations in the asteroid belt, there was a period of intense paranoia. People worried constantly about what might be waiting out there in the dark. What if there were aliens? What if they were hostile? What if humanity's first contact with another civilization turned into a fight for survival? These fears drove the United Earth Space Command to authorize a special project. They called it Project Prometheus, and they poured enormous amounts of money into it for 3 years straight. The project consumed nearly 15% of the entire global military budget during that time. The goal was simple but terrifying. They wanted to build a warship that could fight something far more advanced than anything humans could create. They assumed the worst possible scenario. They imagined an enemy with better engines, better weapons, better defenses, better everything. Then they asked themselves how humans could possibly win that fight. The answer they came up with was unconventional, brutal, and completely insane by normal military standards. They built the UESC Prometheus, a ship that ignored every rule of modern naval design and instead focused on a single principle: survive everything, adapt to anything, and win by any means necessary. When the immediate fears faded and no aliens appeared, the project was quietly shut down. The Prometheus was moved to a storage facility in the outer reaches of the solar system, far beyond Neptune where nobody ever went. The ship sat there in the darkness for 4 to 7 years, forgotten by almost everyone. The files were buried so deep in classified archives that you would need to know exactly what you were looking for to even find a reference to it. Most of the engineers who built it had retired or died. The tactical doctrines it was designed to use were never taught at military academies because they seemed too extreme, too wasteful, too willing to sacrifice efficiency for raw survival. But the Prometheus was still there, waiting in the cold and dark. And now, with the Kaurath Empire demanding Earth's surrender and threatening annihilation, someone was about to remember that humanity had built something specifically for this exact nightmare scenario. When the Kaurath fleet appeared at the edge of the solar system 3 days after their ultimatum, it was like watching a nightmare become real. Every radar station, every telescope, every sensor array that humanity had pointed at the stars suddenly went crazy with alerts. 200 warships had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel and were sitting there in formation, perfectly arranged in geometric patterns that looked almost beautiful if you forgot they were there to destroy you. The ships were made of some kind of crystalline material that caught the light from the distant sun and reflected it in rainbow patterns. They looked like diamonds floating in space, except these diamonds were each the size of an aircraft carrier and packed with weapons that could vaporize cities. Admiral James Cooper stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UESC Defiant, and watched the tactical display with a sinking feeling in his stomach. He was 58 years old and had been in the military his entire adult life. He had fought pirates in the asteroid belt, dealt with rebellious mining colonies that did not want to pay their taxes, and even commanded peacekeeping operations during the Mars independence crisis 15 years ago. He thought he had seen everything space combat could throw at him. He was wrong. Nothing in his experience, nothing in any human's experience, had prepared them for this moment. The Kaurath fleet began moving forward in perfect synchronization, advancing slowly toward the inner planets where billions of humans lived and worked, completely unaware of how close they were to extinction. Cooper looked at his own fleet and felt a wave of despair wash over him. Humanity had 73 combat ships spread across the solar system. They were good ships, built by the best engineers Earth had to offer. They had railguns that could punch holes through asteroid rock and ship hulls. They had missiles with nuclear and conventional warheads. They had laser systems for point defense against incoming threats. Against other human ships or space pirates, they were deadly effective. Against Kaurath technology, the preliminary analysis suggested they would be about as useful as throwing stones at a tank. The Kaurath shields could bend space itself. How do you fight something that can literally warp reality around it? Cooper made the hardest decision of his career. He ordered the entire Earth defense fleet to fall back to Mars orbit and not engage the enemy. His captains were furious, demanding to know why they were retreating without firing a shot. Cooper understood their anger, but he also understood mathematics. If they fought now, all 73 ships would be destroyed in a matter of hours, and Earth would be left completely defenseless. At least if they pulled back, they bought time. Maybe diplomacy could still work. Maybe the Kaurath would accept something less than total surrender. Cooper sent another message to Ambassador General Vorath requesting more negotiations. The alien commander agreed, probably because he found human desperation amusing. Meanwhile, deep underground in a military bunker carved into the Rocky Mountains, Secretary of Defense Robert Hayes was not giving up. He pulled together every important military person he could reach. Generals, admirals, intelligence directors, weapons specialists, anyone who might have an idea that could help. The mood in that conference room was grim. Everyone knew they were facing an impossible situation. Then Hayes turned to his intelligence people and asked them a simple question. Did humanity have anything, anywhere, any weapon or technology or secret project that might give them an edge? He did not care how old it was or how crazy it sounded. He just needed options. That question sent dozens of intelligence analysts diving into archives, pulling up classified files that had not been opened in decades. Most of what they found was useless garbage. There were failed weapons programs that never worked properly. There were theoretical designs that looked good on paper but could never actually be built. There were experimental propulsion systems that exploded during testing. Hours passed with nothing to show for it except growing frustration and fear. Then a young analyst named David Miller, who had been working for 36 hours straight fueled by coffee and terror, found something that made him actually gasp out loud. The file was old, dating back 4 to 7 years to a time when humanity was just starting to build permanent colonies beyond Earth. It was classified at the highest possible level, which meant even most government officials had never heard of it. The project was called Prometheus, and according to the budget records, it had consumed a staggering amount of money. For 3 consecutive years, nearly 15% of Earth's entire military spending had gone into this one program. Then it just stopped. The project was shut down, the files were sealed, and apparently everyone involved was told to forget it ever happened. The file Miller found did not contain detailed technical information, but it did have something incredibly important. It had coordinates for a storage facility in the outer solar system, way beyond Neptune where nobody ever went. Admiral Cooper received the information and made another decision that could have ended his career if things went wrong. He personally took a fast frigate and a small crew out into the darkness of the outer system to investigate. The journey took almost 2 days because they were traveling to a region of space that did not even have official names for most of the objects floating around out there. When they finally reached the coordinates, they found an old military shipyard that had been mothballed decades ago. Most of the facility was shut down and dark, running on minimal power just to keep the structure from falling apart. But deep inside the main construction bay, they found something that took Cooper's breath away. The UESC Prometheus was huge, almost twice as long as any modern warship in Earth's fleet. But size was not what made it shocking. It was the design. Modern warships were built to be efficient, with smooth hulls and streamlined shapes that minimized mass and maximized speed. The Prometheus looked like someone had taken a medieval fortress and somehow launched it into space. The hull was covered in layers of armor plating, thick slabs of different materials stacked on top of each other like the scales on a dragon. It was ugly, brutal, and completely unlike anything Cooper had ever seen. This ship was not designed to look impressive or to be efficient. It was designed to take punishment and keep fighting. Cooper brought 2 people with him into the ship. Commander Jack Mitchell was his best tactical officer, a man who had studied military history obsessively and understood not just how to fight but why certain tactics worked and others failed. Dr. Lisa Reynolds was an aerospace engineer who specialized in older spacecraft systems. What made her perfect for this mission was that her grandmother had actually been one of the original engineers on the Prometheus project. She had grown up hearing stories about the crazy ship her grandmother had helped build, though she had always thought they were exaggerations. As they explored the dormant vessel, walking through corridors that had not seen human footprints in nearly 50 years, they began to understand what they had found. This was not just another warship. This was humanity's answer to a question they had been terrified to ask. What do you do when you meet something far more powerful than yourself? How do you fight when you are outmatched in every possible way? The Prometheus was the answer, and it was an answer that ignored every rule of civilized warfare. The Karath fleet moved into position around Mars like they had done this 1,000 times before, which they probably had. They were not nervous or cautious. They were just going through the motions of another conquest, another primitive species that would bow down or be destroyed. Ambassador General Vorath wanted to make absolutely sure humans understood what they were facing, so he decided to give them a demonstration of Karath power. 2 human cruisers were still holding position near Phobos, one of Mars's moons. They were the UESC Vigilant and the UESC Defender, both good ships with experienced crews. Vorath gave the order, and several Karath destroyers broke formation and accelerated toward them. What happened next was over so fast that most people watching did not even understand what they had witnessed. The Karath weapons were not like human weapons. They did not fire projectiles you could see or missiles you could track. Their energy beams just appeared, like someone had drawn lines of pure destruction through space. The Vigilant's shields lit up for maybe 2 seconds as they tried to absorb the incoming energy, then they collapsed completely. The second volley hit the ship's hull directly, and the crystalline material of the cruiser just came apart. Metal vaporized, atmosphere exploded outward, and the ship broke into pieces. The Defender tried to maneuver away, tried to bring its own weapons to bear, but it never had a chance. The Karath were simply too fast, too accurate, too powerful. Within 3 minutes, both ships were gone. 247 human beings died without ever firing a shot in their own defense. Admiral Cooper watched it happen from the bridge of the Defiant, and he felt something break inside him. Not his resolve, but something else. Maybe it was the last bit of hope that this could be resolved peacefully, or maybe it was the illusion that humans could fight this enemy with conventional tactics. He looked at the faces of his bridge crew and saw the same mixture of rage and helplessness reflected back at him. His communications officer was getting flooded with messages from other ships in the fleet. Every captain was demanding permission to engage, to avenge their fallen comrades, to do something other than sit here and watch people die. Cooper understood exactly how they felt because he felt the same way. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to order an attack, to show these aliens that humans would not go quietly into the night. But he also understood that instinct would get everyone killed. If the Earth Defense Fleet engaged the Cowrath now, they would all die, and then Earth would have no protection at all. He gave the order to maintain position and stand down, and he could hear the frustration and anger in the acknowledgements that came back. Some of his captains probably thought he was a coward. He would have to live with that. Then Vorath sent another message to Earth. He gave humanity 48 hours to surrender completely, to hand over all weapons, to accept Cowrath rule, to become subjects of the Empire. Then, almost as an afterthought, he changed his mind and reduced the deadline to 24 hours. It was punishment for making him wait, for wasting his time with negotiations and delays. The message was clear. The Cowrath were done being patient. Humanity had one day to decide whether they would bow or burn. Back on the Prometheus, Dr. Lisa Reynolds and her engineering teams were performing what felt like a miracle. The ship had been sitting cold and dormant for 4 to 7 years. Systems that should have failed completely were somehow still functional, mostly because the original designers had been obsessed with redundancy and over-engineering everything. Where a modern ship might have one backup system, the Prometheus had 3 or 4. Where normal design called for efficiency, this ship had been built for pure survival. Reynolds and her people had been working non-stop since they boarded, sleeping in shifts, living on coffee and emergency rations, trying to wake up a warship that had been designed for a war that never happened. Most of the major systems came online without too much trouble. The reactors fired up, the life support started working, the engines responded to commands. But some things had degraded over the decades. Seals had dried out, electronics had suffered from cosmic radiation exposure, and some of the more exotic weapons systems needed careful recalibration. Reynolds pushed her teams hard because she knew they were running out of time. Every hour that passed was an hour closer to the deadline, an hour closer to the moment when the Cowrath would start burning human cities from orbit. In the tactical center of the Prometheus, Commander Jack Mitchell was doing his own kind of preparation. He had every piece of information humanity had gathered about the Cowrath fleet displayed on screens around him. He watched recordings of their ships maneuvering, studied the patterns of their formations, analyzed the way they had destroyed the 2 cruisers. Mitchell had spent 20 years of his life studying military history, everything from ancient battles fought with swords and spears to modern naval combat in space. He was looking for something specific, something that might give humanity an edge. What he saw fascinated and horrified him in equal measure. The Cowrath fought with a kind of mathematical perfection. Their ships moved in precise geometric patterns, maintaining exact distances from each other. When they maneuvered, they did so in perfect coordination, like they were all connected to one central brain. Their formations were designed to maximize the effectiveness of their shields, which could overlap and reinforce each other, while also creating perfect firing angles for their weapons. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, like watching a perfectly choreographed dance of death. But Mitchell saw something else too, something the Cowrath probably did not even realize about themselves. They were predictable. Not in an obvious way, but in a subtle way that came from being too successful for too long. The Cowrath had been winning battles with these same tactics for thousands of years. They had refined their approach to something close to perfection, and that perfection had become a kind of prison. They fought the way their computers told them to fight, following tactical doctrines that had been proven successful over countless engagements. They had forgotten something fundamental about war, something that humans knew in their bones because they had spent millennia fighting each other. War is chaos. Battle is not a math problem with a correct answer. It is a living thing that shifts and changes moment by moment. The side that wins is not always the one with better weapons or more ships. Sometimes it is the side that can adapt faster, that can think creatively when plans fall apart, that can thrive in confusion while the enemy struggles to maintain order. The Cowrath had become so good at organized, calculated warfare that they had lost the ability to deal with anything else. Mitchell realized that if humanity had any chance at all, it would come from dragging the Cowrath into the kind of chaotic, brutal slugfest where human adaptability could overcome alien technology. He started planning an approach that would have gotten him court-martialed under normal circumstances. The Prometheus would not announce itself and engage at long range like civilized species did. It would not maintain formation or follow accepted rules of space combat. Instead, it would fight like a cornered animal, like a guerrilla fighter, like every underdog in human history who had faced a superior enemy and found a way to win anyway. Retry DD. The battle that followed was nothing like the clean, organized combat the Karath were used to. It became a wild brawl that threw out every rule of how space warfare was supposed to work, and that chaos was exactly what humanity needed. The Prometheus did not fight like a proper warship. It fought like a street fighter, using every dirty trick Commander Mitchell could think of. The ship swung around Mars using the planet's gravity to suddenly change direction in ways the Karath computers did not predict. One moment the Prometheus would be heading in one direction, and the next moment it would whip around the planet and come screaming in from a completely different angle. Mitchell also used Mars itself as a shield in ways the Karath had never seen before. The planet has a magnetic field, not as strong as Earth's but strong enough to create interference with sensors and communications. Mitchell would deliberately fly the Prometheus through areas where this magnetic interference was strongest, and suddenly the Karath ships would lose their perfect targeting locks. Their sophisticated sensors, designed to track enemies across millions of kilometers of empty space, got confused when there was actual interference to deal with. It was like trying to see through fog when you had only ever fought in clear weather. Then there was the chaff. This was technology so old that most modern military officers had forgotten it even existed. Back when humans fought naval battles on Earth's oceans, they would deploy clouds of tiny metal strips that would confuse enemy radar. The Prometheus had systems designed to do the same thing in space, throwing out clouds of metallic fragments that created false readings on sensors. The Karath detection systems were incredibly advanced, far beyond anything humans had, but they were designed to filter out irrelevant background data and focus on real threats. The problem was that their computers had been programmed by engineers who had never encountered this kind of primitive trick. The sensors saw the chaff clouds and categorized them as space debris, not worth paying attention to. By the time the Karath realized what was happening, entire sections of the battle area were obscured, and they were fighting half-blind. Down in the engineering sections of the Prometheus, Dr. Lisa Reynolds was working miracles that would be talked about for decades afterward. Every time the Karath damaged the ship, and they were definitely landing hits, Reynolds and her teams would find a way to keep systems running. They rerouted power in ways that the original designers probably never imagined but had made possible through their obsessive redundancy. When one system failed, they would bypass it and pull power from somewhere else. When circuits burned out, they would manually rewire connections using spare parts cannibalized from non-essential systems. It was improvisation at its finest, the kind of desperate creativity that humans excelled at when their backs were against the wall. Then the Karath heavy cruiser scored a serious hit. Its energy weapons burned through several layers of the Prometheus's armor on the port side and penetrated deep into the ship's interior. The beams destroyed 2 of the secondary reactors in massive explosions that killed 8 crew members instantly and injured dozens more. Alarms started screaming throughout the ship. On any normal warship, losing 2 reactors would mean catastrophic power failure. Critical systems would go offline. Weapons would stop working. The ship would be dead in space, helpless and waiting to be finished off. But the Prometheus was not a normal warship. The moment those 2 reactors exploded, automated systems that had been installed 4 to 7 years ago kicked into action. The ship had 6 reactors total, scattered throughout the hull in different locations specifically so that no single hit could take them all out. The computer systems instantly recalculated power distribution, rerouting everything through the 4 remaining reactors. There was a flicker, maybe 2 seconds where lights dimmed and systems stuttered, and then everything came back online. The weapons kept firing. The engines kept running. The life support kept working. The Prometheus shrugged off damage that would have crippled or destroyed any other ship in humanity's fleet and just kept fighting. The Karath were starting to realize something was very wrong. Their fleet had superior numbers, superior technology, and superior firepower. By every logical calculation, this battle should have been over in minutes. The human ship should be debris by now. Instead, it was still fighting, still moving, still killing their vessels. The Karath had lost dozens of ships at this point, and the numbers kept climbing. Their perfect formations were breaking apart as ships had to maneuver independently to avoid the unpredictable human warship. Their coordination was suffering because their communication systems were struggling with all the interference and chaff. Everything that made the Karath military powerful was being systematically neutralized. Admiral Vorath watched from his flagship and felt something he had not experienced in his 3 centuries of military service. Doubt. Not doubt that his fleet could eventually destroy this one human ship, but doubt about whether the cost would be acceptable. He could win this battle, but he would lose how many more ships doing it? 50? 100? And what would that say about the Empire? What would it mean if it took half their fleet to destroy a single enemy vessel? Other species would hear about this. Other civilizations that the Kowrath had conquered or intimidated would start wondering if the Empire was really as invincible as it claimed to be. Meanwhile, Commander Mitchell was setting up his final surprise. The Prometheus still had its old nuclear missiles, weapons that seemed almost laughable compared to modern armaments. These missiles were slow and obvious, exactly the kind of thing that point defense systems were designed to shoot down. Mitchell had been launching them throughout the battle on trajectories that seemed random or just plain wrong. Some missiles were fired at empty space. Others looped away from the battle on wide arcs that would not bring them near any targets. A few were shot directly at Kowrath ships but with such obvious approach vectors that they were easily destroyed. The Kowrath tactical officers noted this strange behavior and dismissed it as desperation or system malfunctions. They stopped paying attention to the missiles that were not immediately threatening. That was their mistake. Over 20 minutes of fighting, Mitchell had seeded the entire battle area with nuclear warheads. They were spread throughout three-dimensional space in a carefully calculated pattern that he had been planning since the battle started. 37 warheads total, each one in a specific position. Then, at the moment when the Kowrath were most focused on trying to land a killing blow on the Prometheus, Mitchell triggered them all at once. 37 nuclear explosions erupted simultaneously across a volume of space larger than Earth's moon. The moment that changed everything happened not on Earth, not in the heat of battle, but on the bridge of the Kowrath flagship where Ambassador General Vorath sat staring at screens filled with numbers that told a story he did not want to believe. 43 of his ships were completely destroyed, nothing left but debris fields and the fading energy signatures of their reactors going critical. Another 60 vessels had taken varying levels of damage. Some had lost weapons systems. Others had breached hulls and were venting atmosphere. A few were barely operational, limping away from the combat zone with their crews working frantically to keep basic systems running. This was supposed to be a simple operation, a routine conquest of a primitive species. Instead, it had turned into the bloodiest engagement the Kowrath Empire had seen in over a century. Vorath looked at the tactical display showing the Prometheus and felt something strange twist in his stomach. The human ship was clearly dying. Its armor was almost completely gone, stripped away layer by layer until the bare hull was exposed in dozens of places. Atmosphere was leaking from multiple breaches. Its weapons were firing less frequently now, probably because power systems were failing or ammunition was running low. By any reasonable analysis, the ship should have been destroyed an hour ago. The fact that it was still fighting at all was almost insulting to everything Vorath knew about warfare and technology. His tactical officers were telling him that if they pressed the attack with their remaining ships, victory was certain. They would overwhelm the human vessel through sheer numbers and firepower. It would just cost them another 30 or 40 ships to do it. Vorath had been a military commander for 300 years. He had fought in campaigns across dozens of star systems. He had conquered civilizations and put down rebellions. He understood something that younger, less experienced officers sometimes forgot. Some victories were not worth their cost. Yes, he could destroy the Prometheus. He could throw the rest of his fleet at that one ship and eventually reduce it to atoms. But then what? His fleet would be crippled, barely functional, unable to effectively control Earth's solar system or defend against counterattack. The other human ships, the 70-plus vessels that had been holding position near Earth's moon, would still be intact. They were inferior to Kowrath technology, but damaged ships with depleted ammunition could not fight effectively even against inferior opponents. But there was something else bothering Vorath, something more profound than simple tactical calculations. He had begun to truly understand what he was looking at, and that understanding changed everything. This ship, the Prometheus, was not humanity's best warship. It was not even close to being their most advanced vessel. According to the intelligence his people had gathered, this was a prototype that had been built 4 to 7 years ago and then abandoned. The humans had constructed this monster when they were barely capable of faster-than-light travel, when they were just starting to explore beyond their own solar system. They built it, decided they did not need it, and literally forgot about it for nearly half a century. If humans could build something this dangerous when they were primitive newcomers to space, what could they build now? What could they field if they had time, resources, and motivation to construct a proper fleet based on the same design principles? Vorath thought about the way the Prometheus had fought. It ignored every convention of civilized warfare. It used tactics that were crude, brutal, and horrifyingly effective. It had taken damage that should have destroyed it 10 times over and just kept coming. The ship embodied a philosophy that was alien to Kowrath thinking. It was not designed to be efficient or elegant. It was designed to survive and win by any means necessary, no matter how dirty or unconventional. If humanity started building entire fleets with this mindset, incorporating their own advancing technology with these savage tactics, they would become a threat unlike anything the galaxy had seen in millennia. Not because they had better technology than the Calreth, but because they approached warfare in a fundamentally different way. The Ambassador General made his decision. He gave the order that would echo through galactic history for generations. The Calreth fleet would withdraw immediately from Earth's solar system and return to Empire space. There would be no further attacks on human positions. No occupation. No demands for tribute or submission. His flag captain stared at him in shock and protested that they could still achieve victory if they just committed their remaining forces. Vorith explained with the patience of someone teaching a difficult lesson. Victory in this battle meant nothing if it started a war with a species that might eventually destroy the Empire. Humanity had just demonstrated that technological superiority did not guarantee victory. They had shown that determination, creativity, and willingness to fight dirty could overcome advanced weapons and shields. The Calreth needed to retreat, reassess everything they thought they knew about warfare, and approach humanity with respect rather than contempt. Admiral James Cooper received the message that the Calreth fleet was withdrawing and felt his knees actually go weak with relief. He had been preparing himself for the possibility that Earth would fall, that billions of people would die, that humanity's brief venture into galactic affairs would end in extinction. Instead, they had won. Not through superior technology or numbers, but through sheer blood-minded refusal to surrender. Cooper immediately broadcast the news across every communication channel humanity possessed. Then he composed a message directed at the Calreth fleet and any other alien species that might be monitoring the situation. He explained that Earth had not won because they were more advanced or more powerful. They won because they refused to accept that there was only one way to fight. Humanity offered peaceful coexistence and fair trade to any species willing to approach them with respect. But they also made it clear that any civilization attempting to conquer or subjugate Earth would discover what else humans had hidden in their archives. What other weapons had been designed by a species that spent thousands of years learning how to defeat stronger opponents. The Prometheus limped back toward Earth, trailing debris and venting atmosphere from dozens of hull breaches. Dr. Lisa Reynolds and her exhausted engineering teams worked around the clock just to keep the reactors stable and life support functioning. The old warship had given everything it had and more. When it finally reached the orbital shipyards around Earth, half the crew needed immediate medical treatment and the other half collapsed from sheer exhaustion. Commander Jack Mitchell stood on what was left of the bridge with Admiral Cooper and looked at the damage surrounding them. Every surface was scorched or melted. Control stations sparked with electrical fires that damage control teams had given up trying to fix. The ship smelled of burned metal, leaked coolant, and the acrid stench of overheated electronics. It was beautiful.